Good afternoon to people who are following us on streaming. And before I start my presentation, I would like to thank INCIBE and the organizers of this event, because this is the greatest and the largest cybersecurity event in Spain, because of the wide range of topics and themes and approaches that are offered here. We have inspirational presentations, we have technical experts, we have hackathons, we have competitions. This is also open to schools, to universities, as well as to families. I'd like to thank them for that. So people are coming in, so I'm glad that my presentation is sounds interesting. So I would like to refer to some elements that have been trendy recently in universities, and the title that I gave to my presentation is Hacking the University. So with this title, I want to draw attention to the fact that universities should continue investing in cybersecurity. I would like to clarify here that no university has had their accounts committed, or no university data have been compromised or disseminated. I will start by introducing myself and also the teamwork where I am, and I would like to share with you current research I'm doing. I also would like to share with you basic concepts that, although basic are necessary to follow my presentation. We will see how to launch automated web attacks, and then we will also see a simulated attack and the design of it, and then we will see what are the components that I need for that simulated attack. We will be talking about execution tools and and because I come from the university, the teaching value of this presentation is related to ethical hacking and how to solve vulnerabilities, and I will give you some basic guidelines for that. As I say, I will introduce myself. So this drawing that we see here is my assistant. My assistant will accompany me all throughout the presentation. He will be helping me out in everything that I will be doing here. It doesn't really make sense to introduce myself if I do not present the team of people I work with. I would like to introduce Andrés Caro and Pablo Garcia. They are teachers at Polytechnic University. Andrés is the head of the chairship where we deal with secure development and technology. Then we have José Andrés Félix and Ángel Casada from the Bionex technological service company, and they allow our investigation to be directly transferred in terms of knowledge. That is to say that everything that we do at university translates into real world. And now, Laura Martin and Gemma, loyal colleagues in my career and in my training. And now, so we regarding Cátedra, so we are within the center of competencies that we have created. Cátedra is part of the observatory. That is to say, how to carry out all the research, proof of concept, tools, etc. And now, focusing more into the contents of my presentation, I would like to highlight the following. So, as a result of the test that I will be sharing with you, no account, no information at university was committed or compromised whatsoever. All this allowed me to get an understanding of the infrastructure, also to analyze other universities. Well, the carrying out these tests is difficult because you really need to have specific knowledge, and it should be very clear that the tests that we did were simulated tests, and when we found information, as I said, was reported accordingly, making sure that no information was being compromised. Why I was saying all that? Well, because nowadays universities store critical, confidential information. The research and study that I carried out make some universities feel that they've been compromised in terms of how they built up their username, password, authenticate themselves. But this is not at all. So no data has been compromised. Emails. Often the user that identifies us centralizes the email accounts that we manage, and also very important, banking data and payments. And I also would like to advocate for ethical hacking. Sometimes when you research this type of topics, you come up with some, you find yourself in a situation, shall I do this, shall I not do this, shall I report it, shall I not report it? It's important to clarify that ethical hacking is carried out with the authorization and permission of the stakeholder. So before we carry out any tests, we agree that with the target. The stakeholders should be reported of any vulnerability that may be detected, and then the vulnerability should not be disclosed before it is solved. When I say that, I mean that, well, when a vulnerability is solved, often those who solve it want to be acknowledged for it. It is very important for you to know that hackers look for vulnerabilities to solve problems that they pose. Hackers should never ever be associated with criminality. That's why we refer to them as to it as ethical hacking. And we at university should be role models. We use knowledge always for a good purpose. So regarding the fundamentals, going into technicalities now, on the one hand, we have authentication, which is the IT system. Well, I believe that everyone is aware of it. That is to say, the IT process that we carry out in a web service or in any other service where we have to prove that we are accessing the system. So this is the definition of the Spanish Dictionary of Language. Well, I'm just showing them just to let you know that they don't have an HTTPS protocol. And now I'd like to refer to authentication form. These are pages that we often find when we have a username, a password, and then a button to send or to log in, or where we we get a response, okay, an answer, sorry. And also very important to make a differentiation between targeted attacks and generic attacks. Even if we may infer it from the actual term, generic attacks are similar to those that are shown on the screen. For instance, the one carried out in 12th November, where a server exposed many data due to denial of service attacks. Now, because of the data protection law, people, owners of WordPress, had to install relevant program for data protection. So this type of generous attacks, how are they carried out? Often, shutdown search engine is being used. Shutdown allows us to find out about specificities and components making up that infrastructure. So for instance, if I type in shutdown WordPress, I will come out with a list of WordPress. So that is to say, this tells me about the sites that I can launch a generic attack. But still, I would primarily focus on targeted attacks. Today, if we do social engineering, that is to say, bringing together the information that we found about a user, the net, often more information is disclosed than needed because processes have not been properly defined. But this means that if I knew how a username is built, I could end up finding this information. Here in drawing, we can see a wall. Why do we have that wall in there? So that stands for vulnerabilities that we may find nowadays. Well, what has taken me to research what I researched? Well, first of all, identifying the assets of an organization. In this case, organizations are university. Then I also looked into the processes that universities use for the creation of username and the use that users make of the credentials. After analyzing that information, I have detected that some universities whose systems in place have not been properly designed may be in danger. With this, I mean universities whose credentials are authenticated, however, they do not have any defense in place just in case they are attacked. I can get that information. Well, that information can be obtained through social engineering or through changing credentials. So these are some of the things that I found out in my research. First of all, well, often people typing as a username the ID number. Well, nowadays it's very easy to find the ID number of any public servants because that is published in the official gazette. And then in terms of the password, often that password is a PIN number that has been inherited from the time where bank card was used to withdraw money. So those cards had a PIN number, a 4-digit PIN number. Then we also found other cases. It is a bit more difficult to obtain information, but eventually it is possible. So that is to say, part of the ID number plus a letter plus a number. Well, it is a bit more difficult, but still we have good enough time to try over and over again. Then other universities use an ID number plus @ plus domain, and then either secure or non-secure password. With secure non-secure password means that the system does not make it mandatory for you to use a secure password. And users use passwords that are very easy to hack. Then we also found other universities who give a username either to students and teachers, plus @ plus university domain. In this case, the username is highly predictable. As long as you know the ID number and his date of birth. The only thing they have to do is go to official Gazette and then Facebook or LinkedIn to obtain that information. And in other cases, we've seen, a distinction between Spaniards and non-Spaniards. If you have an ID number, E-letter is typed in before the ID number, and if you have a foreign ID, you have to type in U-letter before the foreign ID number. So those universities who do not have authentication systems that are secure and can stop automated attacks are really in danger. Still, I would like to congratulate these universities. This is an approval stamp that a friend of mine helped me to produce. Here I would like to refer to the University of Cantabria. This university has a very good credential system in place, and then they also have very good exemplary password policy, and I would like to encourage other universities to copy the University of Cantabria. So at the University of Cantabria, if you perform a sensitive activity, or before performing or carrying out a sensitive activity, you have to authenticate yourself for a second time. Also, University Complutense in Madrid also have a good system in place, especially with regard to email. And then the University of Malaga, the process they follow is highly structured and very good. We at the University of Extremadura, we've been improving over time, and then we also have a secure system in place. And now, let us move on right away to show you how to perform a targeted attack. How do you do that? Well, the starting point is a website. From that website, I also need to know the IP of the server, that is to say, the port and the protocol that will be used to send in the username and the password. Then we also have username and password. Here on this website we will have to identify the parameters that we will be using for our request. And then the button and the answer that we will get. Action as well as the response message. And then how do you launch an attack? So this will be classified as a password attack, and this attack can be carried out through a dictionary with thousands and thousands of words, as many words you can think of. There are several of them available to be downloaded, which are quite good. Also password phishing, attempting to impersonate a trustworthy identity, and also brute force attacks. Will be users. These are real ID numbers, also with real letters. I don't know whether these people are alive or not, but these are ID numbers that I can generate through scripts. And then on the other hand, we also have the password, that is to say, numeric code with a maximum of 6 digits. What else do we need? We will be looking for specific information in that website. How are we going to look to find that information? Well, we have Tampa Chrome, which is a Google Chrome add-on. That tool will help us obtain the parameters of the actual server, the ports, as well as the transfer protocol. What for? Well, to later analyze on that very same page the answer that we get from the URL, as well as the message. We will need the login message telling us whether the username is correct or not. We will also need information about the website as well as other information. What do I mean by other information? When I was making the research, I was trying out some things, and then when that information failed, then the website gave you lots and lots of information which was also of value. So that's important also to analyze that other information that the website returns. So remember that we have generated a username and password either through a script or online or through any other tool. And what is the objective? The objective is building a chain that is associated with the query. You are seeing the URL, but underlying that, when we are sending in forms, we are sending it number of parameters. This is what we have to build up. That is to say, those parameters in line with the website design. So if the username is ID user, we will have to identify that in our query. Or if it is password, we will have also to look into that. And all that should be concatenated. So this is what we see before the ampersand. What are we going to use for that? Well, you may say that it takes lots of time. Well, yes, it takes time, but not too much time. I don't know whether you have seen this or not. Well, it was hidden there. I don't know whether you've seen Hydra. Hydra is our three-headed dragon. It will accompany us in our research. Well, the dynamic of a password attack goes like this: user key 1, user key 2, etc. So we just make the wheel spin and then we try it over and over again. This is how you launch a brute force attack. And now my colleague says, well, I think I'm ready to start. I have everything that I need. And now I will explain how Hydra 2 will help us launch this attack. Hydra has 5 tabs. We will have to go through all of them and to fill out the information needed so that the query is correct and therefore accepted by the server. First, I have these 2 options. One is for multiple targets. And what is the objective of this multiple target? Do you remember when I told you how to launch a generic attack? There we will list all the targets we want to attack. And then, on the other hand, we also have a single target. So, authentication system, server, and we enter it there. We had that information before. Then we will have to set up the port and the protocol. In the simulated testing that we did, we used the 443 port and then protocol HTTPS. There are many protocols out there. You may use SSH, SSH2, VNC, etc. Well, this tool allows you to use these protocols and many others that I just don't want to show. Now we know the port, the server, the protocol to send in the query, and we continue. And what about the data that I have generated? To remember that we have the username files and the password files. So we will have the username list because this is a targeted attack. We are using a single target, therefore we will write only one username, and then we have a password list, and here we could spin the wheel. Passwords now, and Hydra also allows us to try passwords one by one instead of a list of passwords. And it's very important that you are careful. Remember that this is a simulated test. We are simulating an attack. So this means that we can set up both the threads and the timeout. That is to say, the waiting times between the queries that we'll be sending out to the server. So the number of threads, execution threads, stands for the number of times that is tried in one go. So it will send out 10 queries simultaneously, each of them with the user and the username, but different password each time. And then it is also very important to find out about the timeout. So that is to say, the waiting time of the server. If we launch too many queries, we will overload the server, and at the end of the day, may not give us an answer, and we will not be able to succeed in trying out all the possible combinations. Now it is time to assemble all these parts. In the next tab, we will be using Tampa Chrome. If we, as I say, just in case we don't know any of the parameters. And this is the most difficult part of the tool. That is to say, configuration of each of the protocols. What protocol have we selected? Well, we have selected HTTPS. Therefore, we are in second line now. And I told you before that our objective was to build up a chain. To build up a chain, we need to have the URL, parameters. So remember that we have the server and we want to attack. That may be the URL. And then we will also need the URL where we will be logging in, where we will be making the attempt. We also need to know the ID user, and we will equal it to user. User is our user list. In this case, we're working with a single user, but we could have a list of users, and we have to concatenate that. You see here on top there are two red dots. It means that the query chain is made up of two parts. On the one hand, we have the URL, but then the password and the username concatenated in the first same section. Then we will also have to identify we will have to find out about the identification of the password, and pass stands for the password list. So we have URL that we will be attacking, the user, and the password. What else do we need now? Well, now we need to send it. Well, send button or any button, accept or login or start session, and that is to be concatenated as well. So this is very important. URL, the built-up query, and then we have another 2 red dots. So that is to say, this is the website that will return an answer. Here we could use the message, the written message, and I have well, with this I mean that the URL on top, the user, the password, and send, Hydra will be generating non-stop up until what? Well, up until when does Hydra stop? Because we are making all the possible combinations. Where does the system stop? Well, if we have access to the system, we can see the answer that we get from the system, either the right answer or the wrong answer. Or we can also see when the website changes. So we are making the query on the same website, and what does it change the website? Oh, well, often it changes the website when we log in, when we succeed. So, and this is fundamental because we have to tell the system, to give the system the signal for it to stop, because we have found the right user and the right password. This is how Hydra works. And now my assistant told me that now he will take some time, he will make a break, and he will watch the Good Doctor TV show. And now what is he doing? Well, he's asking the 3-headed dragon to spit fireballs simultaneously with all the potential possible users' passwords. Up until then, well, up until the right password is found. Well, I understand that everyone has seen, has understood that this is a targeted attack. We can get that information through social engineering. So we have a system that allows us to generate a username and all the possible passwords, because that organization tells us that the password is made up of an X-digit PIN number, and then we start to try to make different attempts. Here two things may happen. So first, there may be no limitations or restrictions. I'm attempting. So nothing stops me from keep on trying. And the second thing that may happen, which is more frequently found, is that it says, well, when you get it wrong 4 or 5 times, they make you wait for a minute. Then if your next 5 attempts are wrong, then they make you wait for 1 more minute. So this is a defense mechanism, but that is more targeted for generic attacks, but not for targeted attacks. So this is very easy to bypass. I have a timeout. I can give that timeout to it. I'm not in a rush. So if I'm blocked for a minute or for 5 minutes, at the end of the day, this is not a good option to stop me. I would like to highlight that. So we may send in 3 or 4 queries, and the next queries may be found to be wrong, And this is so because the system has stopped you for some time, and we could bypass that by changing the timeout. Well, what can we expect, or what results can we expect from the attack? Well, if we succeed, at the end of the day, we will get to know the username and the password. And what did I do after that? When I could see that I could obtain the username and the password easily, then I made an estimation of the time. And I said, well, this time is not too much time because I'm not in a hurry and the system does that automatically. And I have only, well, I worked with a single user. So, and why have I separated these slots? Well, because my password could be in the first group of slots, and therefore I would have found it earlier.
But if I generate and I do my test in a distributed way with 4 teams, and I give 1 slot to each team, and they send the request, how long does it take me? If I increase the number of requests because the server answers properly, how long does it take? That depends on its infrastructure, on its time, depending on the system load. But it was a problem because sooner or later, I had the feeling that I was going to achieve my goal. Considering success times, I would like to talk about the guidelines on responsible disclosure. We at the university will lead by example. We generate knowledge in order to do good. So I would like to tell you something. I usually say, feel that you're part of the solution and not part of the problem. When we're doing ethic hacking, we're doing it for a good purpose. We don't want universities to be harmed. And in this case, I would like to suggest some guidelines of responsible disclosure. First of all, you should notify the person in charge of this vulnerability, and you should never disclose this publicly. I don't need to say that this information should not be exploited, because once you've taken information, you're committing a crime. So I will like to discourage that practice. But if a manufacturer, provider, organization, administrator asks you to do this because they cannot replicate the vulnerability, you should provide them with the necessary detail. You need to help them. You never know. Something else, you need to give them a reasonable time to solve this vulnerability before disclosing it, because if you found it and you publish it so that other people use that information to do bad things, that's not something you should do. You should help to replicate the vulnerability. It is true that when experts with technical knowledge, and here at CyberCamp you should realize that you in Malaga, you're really lucky to have this event here. When you're with people that understand about cybersecurity more than people in different organizations around the country, very often they cannot replicate the vulnerability. Well, if you already know that, help them. Protect and respect resources and information of users. Why am I saying this? Because if you don't respect that information and use it to do bad things, at the end of the day, it will harm you. This part is important. You should publicly disclose the vulnerability if it's not corrected. It's true that sometimes you want to help manufacturers and then they don't listen to you. So disclosing it is a source of controversy. I've discouraged this before, but it's true that hackers want to be acknowledged when they find a vulnerability. They want to publish it. And publishing a vulnerability has a positive aspect, which is that you know that it was solved. So you're getting your goal, which is doing a good thing. The bad thing would be exploiting it. As I've said before, the main thing here is this. Feel part of the solution and not part of the problem by helping to solve it. Since I've done some research about authentication system in different universities, their process they have for returning credentials, I would like to suggest some guidelines for improvement. First of all, they should use captchas for login. For those of you who are not familiar with this term, is this thing that Google uses to look for buses, traffic signs, windows. That's a captcha. Or other systems that show a series of numbers and letters which can be read until you can write what it's written there. That's a captcha. And you would say, well, it's complicated because we log in many times throughout the day and it's going to be very burdensome. I'm going to invest more time in writing the captcha more than writing my password. Okay, why did you use a captcha when the third failed attempt has occurred? It's not in your system, but once there are 3 failed attempts, you use a captcha. Second, controlling the maximum number of failed attempts. You have to control them because you cannot allow massive attempts. A person is not going to be mistaken 100 times. If the person is mistaken 100 times, you should show that person a message saying, oh, this is okay, you've tried enough. So, the number of failed attempts should be controlled, and the systems that tell the user wait for 5 minutes before you try again, I think that these are good examples, but with technical knowledge you can bypass them. Blocking ranges based on IP. At university, you can receive thousands of logins a day. But thousands, 5,000, 10,000. But if one day you receive 150,000, something's wrong. Either everybody started to make mistakes when writing their passwords, or you're receiving an attack. You cannot temporarily block an IP. Well, you can, but you shouldn't do it, because then I move on to point number 5, because they're not registered and analyzed. Perhaps you've analyzed the ones that have authenticated, but very often this is not used, and if they're registered, they're not analyzed. And I think this is very important. Expiration of credential and mandatory change. This is required by many systems. The systems that do not require it is because they have double authentication system, perhaps a password, and they send you a PIN code to your mobile phone, like such as in Gmail accounts, or banking systems. An access key and then a digital signature, and then you receive something on your phone. So every year, at the beginning of the school year, and this practice is good from a psychological view. I start now, they force me to change my password. So this type of policies should be in place. Of course, robust. And last but not least, step 6, double factor authentication in sensitive operations. I think that when a teacher is writing the academic record and it's going to send the record, I think it's pivotal to have a double authentication factor to control that. In this way, I'm sure we'll avoid many problems we've had in our country in recent times regarding academic records. These changes are registered, but I think the teacher should be informed with an email that says you're modifying the academic record. And if the student is informed, it's okay, but it may be the student the one who's and this is the guidelines I suggest. And if you are scared about the name of this lecture, these are the rules I follow. We have universities that block your account. And they tell you, well, if you've failed for 3 days, you'll be out for 1 day. That's denial of service. If I was a student, I was placed off at a teacher, I would do this type of thing every day at midnight so that the teacher is not able to access the marks, because at the end of the day, it's a denial of service. As I've said, it's been a pleasure for me. I was delighted to come here to CyberCamp. I hope that after the controversy created by the name of my lecture, many of you feel more comfortable now. And about the uncertainty that it generated, I would like to apologize again, but I would like to say honestly that there's been no account compromised in any university. I'm open to any university that want to improve the situation or carry out a similar analysis. So please enjoy CyberCamp. It's once a year and not everywhere. Thank you very much.